Good day, welcome to our Praag channel, and don't forget to subscribe if you please. The issue that intrigues me, or that has lately been fascinating me, is why did it take the ANC 25 years to destroy South Africa? Now we know that Mrs. Margaret Thatcher, right towards the late 70s and early 80s, she made a very famous statement in saying that anyone who believes that South Africa could be governed by the ANC is living in cloud cuckoo land, quote unquote. Obviously, it was a crazy idea to turn South Africa over to the ANC. And a lot of people had predicted at the same time the fact that we were going to be turned over to the ANC, as well as the effects that would have. For example, in the 1970s already, a couple of the more right-wing or conservative parties in South Africa, such as the HNP, CP, Conservative Party, they were saying that the NP was preparing for a surrender or a handover to the foreign extremist terrorist organization, as it was then, the African National Congress and the South African Communist Party. But inside the country, many people were saying that that was just fear-mongering, and that the idea, the very idea, was absurd, and only only crazy people could make a statement like that, or only the extreme right wing could ever come up with the idea that South Africa will ever be ruled by the ANC. But of course, all those predictions, and there were some quite astute conservative commentators at the time, whose books I've read in the meantime, who explained exactly why that would happen, and that it was in the logic of the national party's thinking at the time, that it would lead to such a surrender to the Communist Party and the terrorist movement known as the ANC at the time. And of course then we saw the handover, the so-called surrender without defeat, as liberal historian Herman Guillaume called it in 1994. And since then, we've been living through this nightmare of ANC rule. But in the initial stages, it seemed as if things were not going to go off the rails as quickly as all that. And we had, of course, corruption from the beginning, with the arms deal under Mandela, but it was only really gaining ground under Jacob Zuma from the 2007 or so, when he started to take over. Although under Mbeki, I'm pretty sure there was also quite a lot of corruption. But it was the arrival of the Gupta brothers from India, who worked hand in glove with Zuma and his family, who really started to loot the country and just transfer billions of rands out of the country into tax havens in the Middle East. And since then, we've had investigations, and we've had the Zondo Commission on so-called state capture, which lifted the lid on some of this stuff that was going on. But all of that is only the tip of the iceberg, because we know that in all institutions, in state institutions, municipalities, the so-called state-owned enterprises, there has been a huge amount of corruption going on, and the balance sheets of all those institutions have deteriorated over time, up to the point now where they've run out of money, and the country is facing a financial and economic crisis of unseen proportions. Because even at the time when some of the countries in the world were boycotting us, we never experienced this kind of deterioration in the balance sheets of so many public institutions as we are experiencing now, to the extent that the ANC regime is now contemplating actually starting to loot private pension funds in order to get more money to spend on themselves and on their cronies and on their shady deals that they make between their own family and the state or municipalities or state-owned enterprises such as Eskom. But why did it take 25 years? First of all, they didn't get their hands on the levers of power from the beginning. There were still some older bureaucrats, honest people from the old regime, the ancien regime, as they say in French, left, who would have prevented them from doing that right at the beginning. And I think a second reason is that all along they've been able to get taxes from the private sector. And we know that South Africa has got about 27,000 chartered accountants, highly trained and with integrity and mostly honest, who actually police all the auditors, who police all the private companies and make sure that they pay their taxes. So they've had this steady stream of taxes, which they could then spend on themselves and you know, on all their ridiculous projects and on their clientelism by distributing handouts to their voters to keep them impoverished, but at the same time not entirely starving. And that has been going on for the last 25 years. Plus, I think we've underestimated what a wealthy country South Africa used to be. We all remember the 1960s and early 1970s when South Africa was right up there with some of the most prosperous nations in the world. We had high economic growth, we had a strong currency. Many Europeans and British people were quite content to immigrate to South Africa because the standard of living here was just so much higher than in a lot of other countries in the world. And a lot of our public institutions, municipalities, government departments, and also these state-owned enterprises like Eskom, like SAA, Transnet, Denel and the others, they had reserves on their balance sheets. They had actual cash in the bank. And the ANC, the corrupt criminal ANC regime, first had to eat their way through all of our assets. If you think about it, it's almost 400 years that we've saved up in public institutions in South Africa. So they had 400 years of savings that they could first go and devour to get to the point now where they are really hitting the wall. And from the beginning, a lot of people have been predicting that this would happen. But of course, again, they were laughed out of court. They were told, no, our ANC, it's a liberal democratic party like you find in any other country. Forget about the fact that they committed 200 terrorist acts in South Africa, killing civilians, contravening just about every international convention and piece of international law that exists protecting civilians from armed conflicts and terrorism, which is an international crime, and even a crime against humanity if you commit successive acts of terrorism like they did. They forgot about all of that, and they said, no, they've had a change of heart and it's now a liberal democratic party slightly to the left, but we can live with that. And they simply disregarded all of these signs that the ANC would simply do what so many other radical Afro-Marxist regimes have done in Africa, in Zimbabwe, in Mozambique, in Angola, in Guinea, in the Congo under Patrice Lumumba and so on, where they've actually practiced a form of quite primitive communism and eventually run those countries down into the ground, where they ultimately would need not only financial aid from the World Bank and the IMF, but also food aid from the World Food Organization and from various Western donors. Now, South Africa is following this script. We are to the letter following the script of Zimbabwe, just north of the Limpopo, where the same kind of radical policies are being held up as the solution for the country, including so-called land reform. And when he took over, this new much vaunted ANC leader, a so-called businessman, although I don't think he's done an hour of business in his life, he was simply made rich by certain people who thought that they could gain influence that way, and they did gain influence, because he's now the president of the country, and his handlers and his previous handlers and benefactors, they are now cashing in on their man who's running the country. But this great businessman, Cyril Ramaphosa, the first thing he did when he took over was to announce that he would now start confiscating private land without compensation. They call it EWC, expropriation without compensation. So once more, we are going to go further down on the road, the well-trodden road of Zimbabwe, where we would end up in a situation where we're going to have balance of payments problems. Hundreds and thousands of farms will come to a standstill, as they already have in some of the experiments that we've already seen with so-called land reform in South Africa, and where we will hit the very low levels seen in Zimbabwe and Mozambique, both when it comes to the economy, society, and agriculture and food security. But it took a long time. It took 25 years to get to this point where we are beginning to see, call it the beginning of the end. And for a number of reasons, the fact that we've been a wealthy country in the past, and that the ANC has not had all its hands on the loot from the beginning. And of course, their incompetence. They are completely incompetent, and they are also incompetent in stealing from us. They do it all the time, but they need people like the Guptas to actually show them all the mechanisms of how to do it, how to set up all these offshore companies, how to use the banking system in order to loot the public companies and the state. By themselves, you know, drinking expensive whiskey and champagne and living the party that they've been living from 1994, having got a whole country at their disposal to actually go ahead and loot and rob. Yeah, they've been too busy with partying to actually seriously steal from us from the beginning. But it's coming now, as they are running out of money, and they are going to grab every last cent they can get, and they are going to confiscate not only land, but also other private property, other private pensions, And ultimately, we are going to see the nightmare being realized before our very eyes, predicted by so many people in the past who have been ridiculed and scoffed at for so long. But I hope the reality on the ground in South Africa and the statistics coming out of the SA Stats Service at the moment will cause you not to scoff at what I'm saying here. Thank you. Until next time.